well-implemented experimental study, or moderate evidence from at least one well-designed and well-implemented quasi-experimental study, or promising evidence from at least one well-designed study demonstrates a rationale based on high-quality research. So all these things I just defined in the previous slide, and we wanted to really draw these out so it is very clear on what the acceptable criteria for the American Rescue Plan Act funds means. Okay. Next slide. We'll get through the end of mine, Alex, and then I'll open it for questions through 14. Target population. So grants will be awarded to organizations serving school-age youth. Preference will be given to applicants that serve youth who are most in need or at risk and require access to high-quality, no-cost OST programs opportunities. Organizations must be able to describe the community in need, okay? And address that in the narrative in the submission of the application. Grant period. The grant period for this competition is October 1, 2021 through September 30, 2022. We wanted to be clear here that the grant period is different from the program period, which we'll talk about on the next slide. The programming period must take place. So programming must take place between October 1 and June 30 and may occur at any time. Programs must serve a minimum of 30 unduplicated youth. I should say district youth. I think that is important. By the end of the grant period, and 60 in order to receive the maximum grant award amount. Also must maintain the appropriate ratio, that is an adult to child ratio 1 to 15 if serving youth under the age of 17, unless a lower ratio is already required and determined by way of the organization or the building where programming is taking place. Dosage. Organizations must offer consistent and ongoing programs designed to enroll the same group of youth and operates programming either during the calendar year for school for a minimum of once a week for at least 1 week for 24 weeks during the grant period, or an intensive program across 6 continuous weeks, and they will meet for at least 4 hours per week during the program period. The other option is for seasonal breaks. Those are holidays, intersessions, single day closures, and those are throughout the grant period. The program schedule for those must cover a minimum of 3 school breaks for a minimum of 6 hours per day for a total of 15 days over the grant period. Okay. Program locations. Organizations may apply to serve youth at one site or multiple sites. OST programs may be offered at any location, either in or outside of the district. Proposed sites must be listed in the cover sheet. Okay, so it is for district youth, just to be clear, does not mean that the programming has to happen in the district. All right, any questions?
The first question I see, Vinaya, is can you tell me if a program serving youth which meets during school lunch breaks as well as during OST will be eligible? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I believe the answer is yes.
Okay. And then another question was, are you recording this? And then you may be recording, I just can't see it. So we are actually recording this. However, we will also post the PowerPoint as well as this recording on the website at the conclusion. And then that was another benefit of actually having your email as well, where we can directly send the PowerPoint presentation to everybody who has entered their email address in the chat. So that is additional question. And then where can we go for more information on what ARP says about evidence-based intervention?
I can provide a link in the chat by the end of the session, hopefully, if I can find something that makes sense and is relevant. There is a lot of information out there about ARP right now, so I want to make sure that I can find something that's relevant. If I can't find it now, we can send it out later and talk about it potentially at one of our office hours as well. So I would say stand by for that.
Okay.
I also, sorry, Alex, you see the one about the maximum grant award?
Yeah, so I was actually going to combine that question as well. But what is the maximum grant award for this?
$150,000.
Okay. And then can an organization apply under the small nonprofit grant even if their current year budget is over $250,000?
No. Small nonprofit organizations less than $250,000.
All right, I'm trying to go through these quick. And then would mentoring services be considered appropriate for an OST grant?
Do those mentoring services happen within the scope of the OST requirements? If so, then yes.
Should current grantees seeking continued funding not respond to this RFA? Is there a separate process?
If you are a continuation grantee and receive communication from our office about the continuation application, then yes. There is no need to apply for this competition, and there will be a continuation application released very soon.
Okay.
I will reiterate that if you are a potential continuation grantee, you should have received communication from us last week or the week before.
And then what is the minimum participant enrollment number, 30 or 60?
What is the minimum participant enrollment number? For the maximum award, I believe it's 60. Is that correct? I don't believe there is no minimum.
The minimum is 30.
30. Is it 30? Okay.
OST.
Thank you, Deborah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then what if we start with 60 students and 5 drop out during the duration of the program period?
I would need a little bit more clarity for the question. Meaning you're only working with 55 students, meaning what does that do to the grant overall? And you can feel free to take yourself off mute if you want.
Thank you, Vanya. And sure, I can clarify the question. It's just because based on the requirements, we have to provide daily attendance of those students who are coming to the program. And it happens with us. Sometimes we're working with youth and we register 60 of them for the year. And, throughout the year, there might be a couple who will leave the program, and not every time we have a chance to replace them with other students. Because the grant amount is tied to the number of students, I just was wondering how that affects the reporting requirements.
For 5, I mean, if I'm using your example for 5 students, there isn't a major effect, right? The effect is different if we're talking about you submit it for 60 students and you're only able to see half. So hopefully that answers your question. We don't necessarily have a per pupil formula for this, but 5 participants wouldn't have a major effect on the grant overall.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then the last question, and I think we can move on to the next section, is are we able to apply for both? Okay, not the last question. Sorry. Are we able to apply for both the continuation and this application, assuming we are eligible?
I don't believe there's a reason why you can't, but I don't know why an organization would.
Okay. And then the last question for this section, and that way we can continuously move forward, but please feel free to continue sending please continue to send questions through the chat, and we'll be able to answer them at the next stoppage. And then if they're not answered at the next stoppage, we'll definitely answer them either today or in our question and answer document that we will release as well. But the next question is regarding the physical, educational, and emotional and social programming options. Is there a specific style or type of programming that is favored?
No.
All right, sorry. Last question before I move on, just because I think this one is real. Is an applicant required to have 2 years of experience implementing this program?
I believe so. Deborah, what's the requirement? Sorry, I'm working on like 4 different RFAs at the same time, so I apologize that I'm not. I believe so. Two
Yes.
years of experience.
Yes.
Go ahead, Deborah.
2 years.
All right, and I promise this is the last question and move forward. Is it okay to apply for both summer and school year program in same application in different formats?
So this is a school year application only.
Okay. All right, and if they, Jen, if you would like to provide clarification, or if this is a one-off, you can definitely take that question to the learn24@dc.gov email, and we can definitely direct and provide more clarity. But we can move forward, Deborah?
Please, yes. And the only other thing I would say, please email actually the email address that is in the RFA. It's RFA school year 21-22, something like that. But it's right there, and we will be able to answer your questions, and they will be provided in that question and answer document. And any questions that we do not get to today, we will be recording the chat box and answer those questions in that question and answer document. So if you do not have your questions answered today, they will be answered in the document. For continuation, anyone who is eligible for continuation, you do not need to be here. I believe that was already said. Just making sure that everyone has heard that. But if you do apply to this grant and to as a continuation grantee, you will only receive one grant award. Okay, eligibility and requirements. Next slide, please, Alex. So there are a bunch of organizational requirements. If you apply, as I said, as a continuation grantee, or if you apply to both the school year and the small nonprofit RFA, you will only be awarded one grant if you are awarded a grant at all, depending on how you score. So organizations must be 501c3s or nonprofits operating for a minimum of 2 years. Organizations designated as 501c3s who partner with another nonprofit as a fiscal sponsor are also eligible to apply. And organizations must be incorporated and registered to operate in the district and should have an overall operating expense of no more than 30%. For operations, both fiscal sponsors and applicants must provide the information requested if you do have a fiscal sponsor. And you must be in good standing with the IRS, and that's evidenced by 2 years of Form 990 filings, and by the district as evidenced by clean hands, good standing, and a charitable solicitation license. If the applicant is a prior Learn 24 grantee or a current Learn 24 grantee, you must be in compliance with all prior grant agreements. Please make sure to get all documentation and apply for whatever you need, whether it's clean hands or good standing, and that the dates of everything are as stated, and I'll go into that in just a minute. If the organization has an operating budget under $250,000, the organization is eligible to apply for the school year grant. Organizations with budgets over $250,000 are not eligible to apply for the small nonprofit grant. Okay, next slide, please. Programming requirements. Organizations must have offered the program for at least 2 years, which we've already said, and we do require a one-page logic model or theory of change. We have a template that is part of the RFA. You do not have to use that template. It can be in any form you want, but it is limited to 1 page. We are holding logic model workshops on this coming Monday and Wednesday. Financial requirements. The applicant and, if applicable, the fiscal sponsor must include copies of the income statement and profit loss statement, the 990s, and any schedules filed with those 990s, and a board-approved organization budget. LEAs are exempt from the organization budget. Next slide, please. Audits. Organizations may not receive more than $50,000 in any fiscal year without providing a clean audit. Organizations with revenues over $250,000 must submit a copy of an audit that was conducted within the past 2 years. And organizations with revenues of less than 250 may submit an audit or financial review or evidence that a CPA is under contract to perform that audit or financial review, and it must be completed by September 1st. But again, if the organization is going to receive more than $50,000 in a fiscal year, a financial review is not acceptable. It has to be a full audit. And the audits must be received prior to the grant agreements being issued. Grant fund limitations, there's a full list provided in the RFA. I'm not going to go over that right now. I am just briefly going to tell you that that grant funds may only be used to support youth residing in the district, and you cannot use our grant funds to provide services for the same program and the same youth as any other DC government funds are being used for. The Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act of 2020 allows any grantee to apply a federally negotiated income cost rate agreement, also known as a NICRA, to grant funds and to approved budgets. If an organization has a NICRA, please provide that to us. And if you do not, the de minimis indirect rate is 10%. The other thing to note is that applicants may not subcontract for more than 40% of grant funds, and use of subcontractors must be provided in the budget narrative. Application narrative. I think we can stop briefly for any questions right now in that section.
So 2 quick questions that I see are, is virtual or in-person programming?
So we have a preference for in-person programming, but virtual programming is still accepted, as is hybrid. But there is definitely a preference for in-person programming.
Okay, and then a follow-up to that previous 2-year minimum question. If a minimum 2-year history implementing this program is required, how can an organization with no history get started?
Well, there's other funding sources other than the local funding sources of the DC government, and there a lot of people often will subcontract or provide programs through another organization. But that would be some of my suggestions.
I can I can jump in. I'm back. So I agree. I agree with Deborah. I do think, and this is not for our school year competition, but being a subcontractor for another organization, especially as it pertains to working in our summer programs through like the coordinating entity grant, is a great opportunity. I would also second that there are other opportunities out there for organizations that don't have the level of experience that we are requiring for the OST grant. So there are other opportunities out there, but it really is about the work of identifying opportunities that fit the mold of your organization and starting that way.
All right,
Sorry, Deborah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Much appreciated.
And I did just post a link to volunteer to serve as a grant reviewer. And then also another question is, can an organization apply for both the small nonprofit grant and the general grant?
Yes, if an organization has an operating budget of under $250,000 or revenues of under $250,000, you are eligible to apply for both. You would only receive, if you are awarded a grant through your scores, you would only receive one grant. Okay, let's move on. Application narrative. The application process. We provide a checklist for your convenience, so please do not submit the application checklist. All required documents must be submitted as either PDF, Microsoft Word, or Excel, and uploaded in the appropriate section where you'll see in that form. The application will not be reviewed if an applicant fails to follow the requirements or fails to submit all required documents. Additional documents not requested will not be reviewed and will be removed from the application materials, and documents that exceed the page limitations will not be reviewed. There is a typo right there. And that will be corrected before this is sent out. And so it is very important to read the RFA carefully, just like I should have read this PowerPoint before sending it out more carefully, and not just answer the questions in the narrative, but we will definitely correct that right there. And in fact, on the next page, it says that I corrected it here, but not in the PowerPoint, because it says there was a misprint on in section B1, page 7, which I just read, that the documents that exceed the page limits will be reviewed, and it should say that documents that exceed the page limit will not be reviewed. So my apologies, I caught it once, but not twice. And it has already been corrected, and the version has been uploaded into the Learn24 website with that. So what that means is if you submit more pages in your narrative, we will cut it off at the 14-page limit, and those last pages will not be reviewed. The narrative format. Responses should be written according to the sections and in the order listed to receive maximum point allocations. Organizing the narrative by sections with the corresponding header is suggested. This is information that we tell the reviewers. This is exactly what we tell them. So if an answer is found in a separate section, you may not receive full points for that, since reviewers are told that they only need to score one section at a time. That's why we suggest that you also do that. And it's really best to put yourself in the reviewer's shoes as think about what they are reading. In fact, we've already had the question, and Alex, thank you, has already posted it in the chat. It's great to be a reviewer because you can apply for an application and still review in a different, for a different grant competition, because we do have several that are already released and a couple more that are coming very soon. So the narrative includes the budget narrative, which is also a clarification of the budget details, and budget calculations may be separate documents and will not count toward the maximum number of pages. Then other format issues, margins, please use 1-inch margins. Next page, please. Use an 11-point Times New Roman font, number your pages, single space, and the use of tables, graphs, or charts are permitted, but it will count toward the narrative page limit. So if you insert a couple of pages of graphs in your actual narrative, it does count toward the full page limit. All of these details are important, so please follow the instructions. And I am going to turn it back over to Vania.
Thank you, Deborah. I did just answer one question in the chat about should we use your budget template for the project budget or can we use our own? Are there other questions that I need to address, Alex? Or are we good to move forward?
There was one question. It's just where can I find the coordinating entity grant?
Coordinating entity is a summer competition. So we are just sending out grant agreements for that now. There will be an RFA release later for summer for next year's summer competitions. And they are always available on the Learn24 website. They're also promoted when they're available in the Learn24 newsletter and potentially other outlets. Can you go back one slide was the question?
So I'm not exactly sure which one slide
Yeah,
it was, but at the same time, we just learned this, but individuals have the ability to move throughout the presentation on their own as well. So if you wanted to go back to a specific slide, not exactly sure how your screen looks, but it does have the ability at the bottom to move throughout the presentation.
That is exactly correct. Please just don't take control, but you can use the arrows at the top where the numbers are to move through the presentation as you feel free, as you'd like to. All right, I'm going to jump into the scoring rubric. Applicants, applications will be reviewed at an 88-point scale as follows. Organization history and staff experience, 12 points. Need, description, and justification of programs, 24 points. Program measures, 20 points. Youth involvement, 12. Making connections, 8. And the budget, 12. This is a sample of the scoring rubric. So the rubric consists of 4 sections. Each row will be scored from 1 to 4 points. Check boxes are listed under each description, and that is not only to help organizations in writing the application, but it also helps reviewers in ensuring that everything listed under that category is there. So I will also say that that is a best practice if you want to use those check boxes as the organization is going through writing the application to ensure that all the points within the rubric have been addressed and just check those off. Applicant will receive a completed and anonymous score sheets at the close of the competition. Supportive evidence. So applicants need to ensure that specific information and results based on evidence are included in the application. The application is an opportunity to show the effectiveness of the program. Now, there are going to be reviewers reviewing this application, and you want to ensure that they understand and can see clearly from the narrative the effectiveness of programming. The strongest applications include details on how evidence is collected, provides the data itself, program changes that have been made based on the data, and information that affects the outcomes, right? So steeped in the data will be the strongest applications that we'll have. So please ensure that your application includes supporting evidence as it pertains to the program. Budget. Budgets are a required part of the narrative. Financial attachments can be lengthy. Sorry, financial attachments can be any length and any format. Provide an organizational budget. Detail how the grant award will be used. Describe any other sources of funding and the status of those sources of funding, and provide all necessary documentation. We, in the RFA, there is a checklist for all things that need to be included, including materials for the budget. But please ensure that everything requested is included. Workshops. So there is a logic model workshop, which is required. A one-page logic model is a requirement of completing the application. So there are two logic model trainings that will happen next week. One is on Monday from 1:30 to 3:30, June 21st. The other one will be on Wednesday, June 23rd, from 10:30 to 12:30. So please mark that on your calendars. I had mentioned our questions and answers earlier. You can submit questions to rfa.sy21-22@dc.gov, and we will be publishing those questions and answers beginning on June 21st. Questions may be submitted and asked of us anytime until Tuesday, June 29th. And we will be closing, answering the final questions, I believe 3 days after that. So that will go on, at least the answers will be posted at some time, the final answers early July. And it looks like Alex is providing the links to the upcoming logic model workshops in the chat. Thank you, Alex. All right, I think I am passing it to Deborah for required documents.
Thank you. So for required documents, this is a list of all documents required and the dates. It shows, for example, that the 501c3 needs to be valid for at least 2 years. Make sure that all of your documentation proves that the organization is compliant within those time frames, or else the organization is ineligible to apply. So that's why it does get a little confusing when you read the dated, earlier, after, whatever. But it's showing you that the IRS 501c3 documents need to be valid for at least 2 years, whereas clean hands and good standing should be dated within the last year. So the date should stay anything from July 7th, 2020 through July 7th, 2021. Okay. The cover sheet and the program locations is an online only cover sheet. It does not also need to be uploaded. We just have it all written out so that if anybody does want to print it out, you have it right there. But everything else will actually get uploaded. That includes the all of the previous page required documents and the everything else on this page, the statement and loss, the audit, the 990s and schedules, the narrative, of course, the budgets, both programmatic and organization, certification and assurances, the logic model or theory of change, and if it's applicable, the citation or bibliography of the evidence-based intervention research. Next slide. Thank you. Application submission. So the applications and the attachments must be submitted by 5 o'clock on July 7th. Anything received after the deadline will not be reviewed. So you have to have a confirmation, and that confirmation notification will come up when you submit the application. Please either print out that confirmation when it comes up on the browser, take a screenshot of it, or even just a picture on your phone, because we all know that sometimes there are technology glitches, and if you have the proof that it was submitted, we can see it from that from that picture or screenshot, or however you're capturing that. Again, incomplete applications will not be accepted. We can accept applications by fax or in person, no extensions, and there cannot be any missing attachments because that is considered incomplete. And please, again, by July 7th at 5 o'clock. We suggest trying to submit as early as possible so that the system doesn't just get overwhelmed. The review process. The OST office will organize panels of 3 independent grant reviewers who have a background and knowledge of youth development and out-of-school time. Each application will be read by 3 reviewers, utilizing the rubric that is attached to the RFA. In the event that the 3 reviewers' scores differ by 10 or more points from the average, a 4th review will be completed, and the initial score with the greatest difference from that mean will be discarded. The 3 reviewer scores that will be used to then be used, to calculate a final score that is used to rank the applications. These scores and ranks will be used to determine the grant awards. Priority points may be provided to ensure equity across the district. Additional points will be awarded consistently and objectively based on information supplied in the proposal. All reviewers are trained in the use of the rubric, and all reviewers are screened for conflicts of interest. And again, we absolutely recommend that anybody applies as a reviewer. You would never be allowed to review in the competition that you are applying for, but there are other competitions, and it is a great way to understand the process even better. Plus, we always need wonderful, great reviewers. Notification of awards. All applicants will be notified via email about the status of the award by September. Applicants will receive the anonymous reviewer score sheets by October, and applicants should ensure that that email address, the rfa.sy2122, is on your list of acceptable email addresses so that you ensure that those emails are not sent to any spam filter. All funding decisions are final and are not subject to review, appeal, or protest. Application tips. Please make sure that the application exactly follows the order in the RFA. I explained that previously because that's what we tell reviewers, that they should score by this specific section. Do not submit documents or materials that aren't requested, such as curriculum or photographs. The budget narrative should be detailed. Please show your math, check your math, and it should be based on each line item in your budget. So make sure that when you look at your budget, you're discussing it in your narrative. Don't discuss something that you don't use for our grant funds. Avoid general language, be detailed and specific, especially regarding your program activities and schedule, how you've used the evaluations to improve your program, how you've incorporated youth voice in the program design and the evaluations, and how you're tapping into other revenue streams for your program. What we often suggest is that you make sure someone can read the narrative and make sure that when they read it, they understand what youth experience in your program. What does it feel like to be in your program? It's always best to write it early and ask someone, whether it's a friend or a board member, someone who doesn't know your organization and what you do as well as you do, to read that application and to score it with the rubric that's attached. And please ask them to be tough. Ask them to really score the application. Give them the same parameters that we give our reviewers, score it by section. Because if they're just going to be nice to you and say, wow, that's a really good job, they're not doing you any favors. I think we lost the PowerPoint, Alex. Does anybody else see it?
No, I'm coming back. Somebody, it appeared somebody tried to take control. Yeah.
Please do not hit the take control button. Okay, we're on, yep, grantee requirements, great. So this slide shows a general list of the grantee requirements. Since the OST office is accountable to the taxpayers for our grant funds, we do have strict compliance measures. We also work very closely with our grantees to make sure they are able to comply, and we try to ease that burden whenever possible. We do absolutely believe in an open door policy, and we're happy to talk or answer your questions at any time. We pride ourselves on being responsive, and available. So I don't need to read all of the requirements. They're right there, and we're getting close to time. So I'm going to let you read those on your own. Important dates. The RFA was released on June 4th. June 17th is today for the grant information session. Both the 21st and 23rd, there will be logic model workshops for anybody that needs that. Because as Vania said earlier, a logic model is a required document. Tuesday, June 29th is the last day to ask questions. The July 2nd is the last day that answers will be published. July 7th is when applications are due. The rest of July, if we need to ask questions for clarification, we will reach out to the applicants, and awards will be announced in September. We will answer grant questions in that Q&A document. As I said, please reach out to the address listed, and we will update that every 3 days afterwards with any new questions that are asked. We have 3 more minutes. We can try and get through if there are any questions.
All right, I got 2 quick questions, or 2 questions. First one is quick. Second one is this a multi-year grant or a 3-year cycle?
So there is the potential for continuation grants for up to 3 years. So it's your first year and then 2 years of continuation for school year grants. That does not include summer grants. Summer grants are not on a continuation cycle.
Okay.
The question specifically, though, we don't consider these multi-year grant opportunities.
Okay. And then I have a question about a specific narrative question. It asks, define the number of youth retained throughout the grant program. Is that asking us to set a target retention rate? The question below asks for historical retention data. So this question should be forward-looking.
Let me just go back first to the 3-year. It's also the thing that I forgot to say is it's always contingent on the availability of funds. And for the question that you're asking right now, the retention of youth for, I'm not sure I understand the question, so I might need to put that in the question and answer document.
Are there other questions we should address? If not, I would ask Courtney to, if you're willing, hop on and clarify for us. I mean, we do only have 1 minute left, so maybe Deborah is right, but I'm not sure that I'm clear on the question, and I'm really not clear on the question below. And it's because we are not looking at likely what you are looking at, so we're just not clear.
Yes, hi, this is Courtney. So my question was, it said to define the number of youth retained throughout the grant period. And at first I thought maybe that was asking us to give some historical data, but that question is then asked later on. So I was wondering if you want us to set a target of, we expect to retain 80% of youth, or exactly what you're looking for with that question.
I think that goes back to the question that was asked earlier, right? If you list that you are going to work with 60 youth, how many of those youth have been retained?
But how do we know that before the school year?
It would relate to your historical data of what you have done. I mean,
Right.
if you normally have 100 youth and you retain 50%, then.
And you could use percentage or by way of number, right? Like generally, if it's again 100 youth and you generally retain 75 youth, and we know that that's 75% of youth. And then historical data, meaning over the period of time, right? And understanding that a requirement is to have 2 years worth of this type of programming to qualify as an organization. So really just detailing the data around the retention of the youth as it pertains to the programming that has happened, that you are saying in the narrative, this program has been successful, and here's the data on how we keep our youth engaged.
Okay, so I think to confirm, I am hearing that we should set a retention target rate or number, but because I guess my question is,
if you want to in the narrative to provide clarity, but it's not a require. So I just want to be clear, like it's not setting a retention target rate is not a requirement of the grant.
Okay, I guess my question was because that it says define the number of youth retained throughout the grant period, and then following that question, there's another question that asks kind of what your historical retention has been. So it seems like maybe they are one question, but they were kind of set as two. So I just want to see if there's two different pieces of information we should be providing there, or I think we can kind of combine it.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, Alex?
Just when will the recording and PowerPoint become available? So we do have to do a little bit of cleaning up on our end. So just give us, today is Thursday. It's almost 5 o'clock. I mean, almost. If not, close the business Friday, early on Monday.
And that'll be found at learn24.dc.gov.
That is correct. And it will be under the funding opportunities as well. Seeing as though there are no additional questions or anything of the sort, but if in the event that you do have additional questions that were not able to be asked today, please feel free to email us at either learn24@dc.gov or RFA, or more specifically, please feel free to email us at rfa.sy21-22@dc.gov, and that email address is also on the screen as well. But feel free to email us and keep in contact if you have any additional questions or concerns, and we'll definitely be here to answer and assist in any way possible. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, team.
And I think we can stop recording now, Alex.